Astrology Livestream. My name is Nick Epso. He is Patriciris. We are astrologers. How you doing, Patrick?
Um, Overwhelmed and just trying to keep my head above water.
That good, huh? What?
Yeah, so just a bit busy, but happy to be busy, but also very busy. How about you?
Okay. So the water is it's a metaphor. You're not literally drowning. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Just wanted to double check. It didn't look like you were.
Yeah.
Well, may whatever you're swamped in be fruitful and productive. Yeah, I have been saturating myself with materials pertaining to the life of Truman Capote, our subject for today. So I am also, drowning here. I'm drowning in Truman. It's been quite an odyssey. There's a lot of stuff out there about the man. And just sort of getting it all together for today's episode. So,
maybe you start off with who is Truman Capote? If people don't know this person, what should they know about him to be able to even understand why we're talking about this person?
That's a good place to start. Truman Capote was an author. He was an author who had several sort of stages to his career. The first stage to his writing career, you would say, was when he was sort of a hot, young, openly gay author in the late 1940s. In 1948, he published his first novel, Other Rooms, Other Voices, it was called. Or it might be Other Voices, Other Rooms, one or the other. I forget if the voices come before the rooms or not. Either way, he was, so he was seen as this new sort of part of this new post-war, sort of generation of New York based artists. He was really from the South. He had grown up in Alabama. He was born in New Orleans, but he was very much a New Yorker, certainly by the time he became an author. And just sort of part of this post-war artistic movement. And then in the 60s, his career hit another plateau, if you might say, with the publication of a book called In Cold Blood, which is basically, it seemed to be the founding text, the originating text of the true crime genre. Someone just sort of writing a novel-size book about an actual true crime case. Capote wasn't so much interested in writing about murder or crime as he was about writing a novel that was entirely nonfiction, which was what he was striving for. In Cold Blood was a formidable success and is rightly seen as this sort of pioneering text in this subgenre of literature. But it took its toll. The thing about Capote was he became very close to everyone in the town, this Kansas town where this murder had occurred. This family of four, the Clutters, were murdered November 16th, 1959. And Truman and his friend Nell Harper Lee, the author of To Kill a Mockingbird, who was a childhood friend of his, they went to Kansas in the aftermath of this murder to investigate it. And this is all the material that goes into In Cold Blood. So Truman became close to friends of the deceased family members.
Also
the police. Well, yes, I'm getting there. Getting there. The police, the police officer. No, because you really have to understand, like, yes, he did get close to the killers, but even before the killers were found and arrested, Truman had already sort of worked his way into the fabric of this small Kansas town, who were not used to this, really effeminate. I mean, yeah, a lot of gay men in this era, of course, would closet their themselves and what have you, but Truman was unclosetable, is the best way to put it. And to his admission, this is not a hot take or anything.
He would
like
say
that.
Yeah.
If that jargon were around today, he would absolutely concur. But he covered this murder, and then when the murderers were found, this is in late 59, early 60, And he's still hanging around Kansas, and the murderers are found, and then he befriends the murderers and he gets their story, and their story is a big part of what In Cold Blood is about. If anything, it winds up overshadowing the murder victims in the town and all that. But long story short, eventually the killers were hanged in 1965, and Truman wrote the book in the early 60s, sort of waiting for the ending, as it were. So he got really, really
Right.
close to these murderers, and then then it's just like, well, damn it, I need to end my book. These guys got to be hanged.
Yeah, it's like the opposite problem of like George R. R. Martin, like,
Right, right.
They-
Yeah, it's sort of like, yeah, he's so, but that does eventually happen. They are eventually hanged. He's got the ending for his book. He publishes the book. It's a huge success, and there's a movie that's also considered to be a real classic, with future accused murder. What's his name? Beretta plays Perry, one of the killers. I forget it. Robert Evans? No. I forget the guy's name, but an actor who later really would be an accused murderer plays one of the killers in Cold Blood. Anyway, long story short, that happened. And in a way, so because In Cold Blood is such a huge success, Truman is this other side to him is he's a real sort of social butterfly in the New York scene. He's friends with the likes of Andy Warhol and what have you, but
Elizabeth
also
Taylor and
sure, yeah, all the sort of glamorous movie stars. But he's also very, very close friends to a group of women, or a woman, a sort of a collection of women that he has grouped in a way, who he refers to as his swans. These are these sort of elite, American high society women from high profile marriages. In many cases, these are women who had to sort of marry their way into privilege.
so the
Although
Desperate
not all of them.
Housewives of Manhattan.
I guess so. Yeah, it is. It is there's a lot of what would become interesting insofar as Desperate Housewives was ever interesting to anyone. There is something to that, and what Truman has in his life with these women he calls the swans. And but it's kind of like, I mean, he, even before he writes, he's trying to write about the swans when the Clutter murder happens, and he gets distracted within Cold Blood. But he was trying to write about them much earlier in the 50s. But he gets very close to some of these women, and eventually in the 70s he does write about them. He's working on a book he'll never wind up finishing. It kind of destroys him trying. But this book, Answered Prayers, that is going to be about these swans, these friends of his. One chapter is published in I think Esquire magazine, or one of these sort of monthly magazines, and
He spills the dirt.
He spills dirt on
tea.
he spills the tea on some of his friends. It results in one woman's suicide. And we can get into that, and that's a bit dark. And then some of his other very close friends are made to look, I guess, foolish by association. I mean, if anything, I mean, Truman would say he was really trying to send up their husbands, but they just wind up looking, I guess, silly by association. Anyway, long story short, Truman wound up sort of ostracized and diminished. He made some pretty embarrassing TV interviews in the late 70s, where he was too pilled up and too drunk to really be on camera. And yeah, eventually died at the house of Joanna Carson, the ex-wife of Johnny Carson, who was one of his swans, who he had written about, but she's more forgiving than, say, some of the other women that he had befriended and, in their eyes, betrayed. So that's Truman, and we're going to look at his chart today. We're going to get into different facets of his life. I just watched I guess when you proposed, you were the one who proposed doing Truman. I had read his biography written by Gerald Clark, like in the year 2000, I believe. I read that book, and he was someone who I always had a file on his chart, and I was aware of his life, but I didn't go and read his books. I didn't get too deep apart from the work I put together years ago. But I guess you saw that there was going to be this season of Feud, right? This mini series.
Right, still airing.
It's still airing. I've seen the 6 episodes that are out so far.
It's called Feud Truman Capote versus the Swans, and the Swans.
Right.
Focusing on that kind of era of his life where he spilled the tea on his friends, and they try to kind of get revenge on him.
Yes.
So that was the reason I suggested we do Truman Capote, because I figured that maybe people would be watching this. There is a little bit of chatter kind of happening right now, looking at this kind of era of history, and so it might be fun to kind of take a look at this person, since we do have somewhat of a birth time for them.
Yeah, we do.
And
we absolutely do. And no, it was a good choice. I definitely want to cover more literary figures. Generally, I want to cover writers whose work I've actually read.
Yeah, I haven't read any of Truman Capote's work.
Yeah, no, I mean, with Truman, I mean, anything of his I have read, I can really appreciate there's skill in there. So insofar, but that we're talking about, excerpts here and there, and I've never just sat down and read one of his books. But I have read a lot of books about him. I've read about 3 or 4 books about him, and watched some documentaries, watched all these fictional things that have been made about him. And just even earlier today on YouTube, I was watching like a half-hour documentary that was made about him in the 60s, and then some of his TV appearances, and just getting more of a sense of that period from his life. So yeah, we're gonna, like, as we've done with everyone else we've talked about, we're going to get into the astrology of this person, and how the ups and downs were reflected by transits and progressions he was having. We are going to talk about his ZR. You've prepared his.
No, I haven't.
Oh,
but I can.
Okay, we can put it up and wing it and see what happens.
No, we don't have to. I mean, I think there's enough to cover, honestly, with his transits. But
yeah, okay, all right. Well, let's see what we do.
Chart.
Okay, let's look at the chart and stop your yapping, Nick. Fair enough.
No, okay. You're fine. Yeah, I didn't expect you to go so in depth. I just figured you'd tell us, he was this kind of acclaimed, pioneering, and notorious author.
Okay, so you didn't think
I think that was good. That was good. That's good for anyone who was listening. They know now who we're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I think you needed a bit more. Literary figures don't have the same kind of cachet that they did, 40, 50 years ago.
Right.
When, like, absolutely, you didn't need to have read Truman Capote's work to know a whole lot about him. But as opposed to everyone else we've covered so far, Malcolm X, Aretha Franklin, Napoleon, Britney Spears, I think all 4 of those people, they're well, I mean, Britney's still alive and kicking, obviously, and everybody knows who she is, but even the other 3 still have this presence in modern day discourse, and I don't think Truman quite enjoys that at the same level. So I think it was worth going into his biography in a little more detail. All right, so here's the chart. Can you see that?
Yeah. So obviously, it's a little bit of a concern that it's around like an hour. It's around the hour mark.
Sure.
And it's a B rating, so it's from like a biography.
Mm-hmm.
What else do we know about the source of the?
Yeah, it's it would have come from Truman himself, because I mean, Truman was
I think
Truman was quite forthcoming about his. Sorry,
the biographer Gerald Clark interviewed Archer Capote and other kin. Wrote, finally on Tuesday at 9:30, mother began labor. The baby was born about 3 o'clock that afternoon.
Yeah,
so that's where the time comes from.
Yeah, exactly. Gerald Clark, wrote the biography that I read, and he was writing the biography when Truman was still alive. I mean, he was already
posthumously, right?
It was published posthumously, but Gerald Clark was closely associated with Capote. Like, for instance, when Capote was going to publish this work, Le Cote Basque 1965, which is the magazine article that came out in
10 years later.
1975. Yeah, in 1975. Gerald Clark was around to say, "Oh, Truman, I don't know if you want to do that. You could make some enemies." So he's not just sort of, someone who's coming around after the fact and writing about Truman. He's someone who knew Truman and was covering his life even 10 years earlier, and more so. Now, as for the time of birth, there is, when we get around to Truman's childhood, when this natal Saturn in Scorpio comes up to Aquarius, we're going to see that his parents are having kind of a reverse custody battle over him. It's really heartbreaking. And you'll see it's with like Saturn in Aquarius. I have no doubt that Aquarius is rising in his chart, and I think it's actually probably pretty close to 11. But we'll cross that bridge when we come to it.
Mm-hmm. I just figured we should answer that question in case anyone looks at the chart and thinks, yeah. But I agree. I think Aquarius is definitely the right rising sign for sure.
Yeah. Now, one of the interesting features of his chart is he's got a Saturn-Mars mutual reception
across the 1st and 10th.
Across the 1st and 10th. So they're both angular. It's a diurnal chart. This Mars in Aquarius of his is getting ready to station retrograde. He was born, it has just stationed direct, rather. It was retrograde during the summer of 1924. And 8 days before he was born, it had just stationed direct in Aquarius. So it's a slow moving Mars. It's not, he doesn't merely have Mars in Aquarius in the 1st house. He has this Mars that's just coming out of its retrograde phase, and it's just stationed direct. And of course, it's opposite this Venus Neptune North Node in Leo. So that you get a whole axis here, right in this 1st 7th house axis. That's really interesting.
Right. When I first saw the chart, I was like, oh, he must have been born like within a day of Jimmy Carter. Except Jimmy Carter was born with Libra rising. I think he was born a day later or so with Libra rising. So
right.
It was kind of interesting to sort of, in my own head, kind of flip back and forth between like the chronology of Truman Capote versus things that were going on in Jimmy Carter's life, given that they have there's at least one interesting overlap that I thought that might be cool to point out later on if we have the time. But
okay. You don't want to bring it up now?
Oh no, because we're still analyzing the basics of his chart. I think the fact that Mars and Saturn are in mutual reception across the 1st and 10th tells us that because Saturn is this ruler of the ascendant, that's like the area of his life that we would think would be kind of an area of intense focus and activity. So this is a person whose image is associated with their reputation. And what's interesting is in his first book, Other Rooms, Other Voices, he had this photo of himself on the back cover, which kind of, aside from the sensational nature of like an openly, gay sort of autobiographical work coming out from a very talented young author, it was also this idea of this very like this picture just kind of drove people nuts. That
it's the most ordinary picture today.
I know.
But I think at the time it was seen as kind of sexually daring.
Right.
He's fully clothed. He's a young guy with a young 22-year-old guy with or 21-year-old, I think, when the picture's taken, a guy with blonde hair and sort of coquettish demeanor. I guess it's the thing that's so
it's
offensive.
The hands draped on his body,
right? Yeah.
It's I kind of so I sort of get it. So I think it's interesting because we have an interaction between both malefics, but one of them is like of the sexton favor versus against the sexton favor. And I think it's interesting because he, on the one hand, is very acclaimed in his field, right? Like indisputably like a great author. At the same time, kind of despised by many, and even with people within his own field, and certainly considered to be kind of a sort of controversial sort of figure to broader sort of polite society. And I think we can also see, this is a person who just, would provoke these kind of strong reactions from people, and that's partly because of many manners of his self-presentation. And he would even say that himself. He for one thing, he has this very distinctive voice, right? This very distinctive
Yes.
manner of speaking. It's kind of like, my wife was saying, it kind of sounds like Droopy, because we were watching the Capote movie with Philip Seymour Hoffman.
Yeah,
It kind
yeah.
of sounds like
I think
Droopy.
Yeah, I think
But
Droopy might even be based on Truman.
oh, really? I didn't know that.
I mean, I don't know that for a fact, but
To me,
there is like a lot of those Hanna-Barbera and Warner Brothers voices are actually based on like movie characters and
celebrities.
people. Yeah, like Pepe Le Pew being based on Charles Laughton's
Okay.
Frenchman
All right.
in Algiers, in the movie Algiers. So there is something to that.
To me,
But
it
yeah,
sounded a
he's
little like Cartman. If Cartman was like doing an impression of like a Southern boy.
yeah, but also but the
um,
thing is, if Cartman was like on, some serious barbiturates. It's like- because
yeah,
yeah, no, there's a Southern lilt to the way Truman spoke. I mean, this is the thing that you're getting at. Like, so some of the ways Truman was provocative was just by the way he was, which
just with
which
the way he
was
was. Yeah.
which was kind of like we were intimating at earlier, sort of over the top, effeminate kind of character, by anyone's sort of measure, just simply like un, un, un unmitigatingly, unapologetically, uh, uh, you
Like
know, uh,
almost caricaturish,
exactly,
but
exactly.
yeah.
You almost think that he's doing a character. You almost think that. Yeah, it definitely would throw a lot of people off. But at the same time, the thing about Truman is, I mean, he did have a cutting way of speaking. Like, he would
And
he
he's
would say,
catty.
yeah, exactly. He could be incredibly catty and cutting and merciless. So
Savage.
so even though his voice had this kind of passivity to it, like, the speaking voice of someone who's trying very, very hard not to ever hurt anyone ever, but at the same time, the words that would come out of his mouth could be really, yeah, sometimes even vicious, even sometimes,
Right. Well, and
certainly cutting.
I have to say, this kind of reminds me of how, I guess, in the South, like one of like the most devastating things you can say to someone is, oh, bless your heart,
Right.
which basically means fuck you, but like it's said in this extremely lovely way, but it's actually, laced with poison. Um,
Yeah, he could definitely, that could be him. One of my favorite barbs of his, in early 1959, there was a TV show. I've even got the chart for it here because I looked it up in the TV Times. He was on a TV show with Norman Mailer and Dorothy Parker. First of all, boy, do I wish we still had videotape from this TV show. Like a lot of things from the 50s, it got wiped. But this was a show that was called Open End, and it would broadcast out of Newark. And basically, it would start at 10 p.m. and they would just have, I don't even think there was a host necessarily. I forget if there was or not, but they would just have local intellectuals come on the program and talk until they got tired. There was no structure. I mean, this is the 50s.
this was live streams back in the day.
Exactly. No, it really was. You can see it's January 59. So TV is still pretty young,
Right.
Um, so yeah, this was just something, if you were at home on a Sunday night in New York, you could turn on TV and watch the likes of Capote and Mailer and Parker ramble on about whatever. And on this particular night, they wound up talking about, excuse me, they wound up talking about the Beats. Jack Kerouac's On the Road had only just come out in September of 57, and Allen Ginsberg's poem Howl had been on trial for obscenity in 57. So the beatniks were sort of like the big, sensation, literary sensation of the moment. And so these other slightly more established writers like Capote and Mailer were discussing the beats. And I think Mailer was defending Kerouac, and Truman Capote said, that's not writing, it's typing, which is just brutal. But you can imagine he said it in that voice of his. So it's sort of like, it's delivered in this, damp sock of a voice. And
I
yet
was
it's
practicing my
razor.
impression, but I don't know if I should.
No,
continue with it.
it's not called for.
But,
everyone knows what Truman
yeah.
sounded like. If you know anything about Truman Capote, you know what he sounded
Yeah.
like.
I mean, like I was reading a little bit about his feud with Gore Vidal, and I just thought it was very funny. He was asked about because I guess in 1975, he's got sued. Gore Vidal decided to sue him, and interestingly, Truman Capote was asked what he thought about it. He's like, it's just so sad that he's still breathing.
Yeah, I saw that interview. That's an interview in 79 that he gives with David Susskind. It's on YouTube. So I actually saw him say that. Yeah, it's
So,
sad that he's still
okay.
Everything about Gore is sad. It's sad that he's still breathing.
Yeah. And I gotta say though, Gore Vidal had a good one in him, because when Truman Capote finally died, Gore Vidal was asked what he thought about it, and he said that was a wise career move. So these guys hated each other.
Yeah.
All right, but look at
but
their sons.
they hadn't always hated each other.
Look at their sons. They're
a year apart.
They are trying to occupy the same space here. Gore Vidal hated the fact that Truman Capote got a larger photograph than him on the cover of a magazine,
but it's worse. No, it's a little deeper than that, and it comes down to what the lawsuit was about as well, because Gore Vidal is loosely related to Jackie Kennedy Onassis.
Right, but you're getting into the details of the lawsuit,
right? But it does. I mean, this is part of what Gore hated about Truman, because Gore Vidal actually wrote about American politics,
right.
Capote did not. Capote was all about glamour and these rich women who don't do anything. Vidal really did write about like American politics and things of gravity. He debated Buckley. On TV and all.
Yeah, and
that's an interesting story in and of itself. But long story short, Vidal thinks of himself as not merely a man of letters, but a political man.
Right.
And the whole reason he was suing Capote is Capote had some anecdote about Vidal getting kicked out of the White House by Bobby Kennedy and laying his hand on Jackie Kennedy and Capote's friend Lee Radziwill, who is Jackie Kennedy's sister, and one of the swans that he offended. Capote was expecting Lee Radziwill to back him up in this lawsuit against Gore Vidal and vouch for what Capote had alleged, and she wasn't going to do it. And so, it was egg on Capote's face. I don't think it ever really got settled. Everyone was telling him to apologize.
Right. I just thought what was so funny about 1975 is like Pluto was transiting between 7 to 9 degrees of Libra.
Right.
So you can automatically see how that is hitting the fact that their sons are together in that place. And, I don't know exactly when that lawsuit was filed, but you can see how Pluto was transiting across those degrees where they have their sons during the time frame of this lawsuit. And also worthy of noting is for Truman Capote, sort of time twin, that was when Carter was running for president, so that Pluto conjunction to Jimmy Carter's son was happening in his first house.
Yeah.
So I thought it was interesting that for Truman Capote, Pluto conjoining the sun in his 9th house was about entering this kind of legal battle.
Yeah.
Right. Because 9th relates to like legal issues. But it would be like really consequential. You can see how the nodes in this time were moving through his 10th house. So we also would have had eclipses in his 10th house. And, this period of his life was described as like social suicide. He didn't
Yeah.
realize
Yeah.
how, disastrous this would be for him on a, sort of personal level. This sort of contributed to his own decline, really.
Yeah, it did.
Um,
Absolutely.
and, and, so this was this wasn't just like a random 10th house, bad reputation time. This is something that really changed his life, from here on out, once Pluto conjoined his sun. Whereas for Jimmy Carter, with Pluto going through his first house as he is on the way to becoming president, we can sort of see it's more of a first house thing. It's about something bringing sort of maybe more positive sort of attention to himself and his identity in a way that he hadn't before.
I think the way to contrast the two is, Pluto will take someone from the gutter and send them to the stars, or take someone from the heights and send them down to the gutter. And for both Truman and Jimmy Carter, the Pluto transit is signified for both of them. But like for Truman, he's coming from being this, really highly touted, highly respected, friend of every socialite kind of guy,
from the top to the bottom.
From the top to the bottom, he loses everything, and he's on a path of self-destruction from here on. Whereas Jimmy Carter, part of the reason he wins the presidency is because he's such an outsider,
peanut farmer.
He's got nothing to do. This is coming out of Watergate, so he hasn't been tainted by all these. You can't. No one wants to vote for someone who's like a senator or a congressman or anything like that. For Ford is the guy he's going to be running against, and yeah, like, the fact that Carter is just such an outsider to the whole Democratic machine really is a big part of what makes him this viable candidate.
Yeah, no, thank you for providing that
sure,
that component. That makes much more. That's an even better way of looking at it. I just want to touch on what B. Havens has said here.
Yeah,
they said on YouTube they have a love-hate thing with Gore Vidal. Their writing is both revealing and interesting, but talk about a misogynist piece of yeah, I mean, none of the people here were discussing are angels, all right? This is not an endorsement.
I mean,
they're interesting.
Look, we're not going to defend anyone's misogyny, but we're talking about 20th century people here. It's just going to be everywhere, no matter where you step. Right. And Truman had his own. Truman wasn't, much as he was a friend to women. He had his own barbs against them, and they had their barbs, with him. A big part of the, when Lee Radziwill didn't want to back him up in his suit, with Gore Vidal, defend him in this lawsuit. She used the F word to describe the two of them, and I'm not talking about the word fuck. I'm talking about the other F word.
That's another F word,
right? And that, I mean, you can. Who knows how many times people called Truman that, right?
Right.
Probably it didn't start and end with Lee Radziwill. So yeah, look, it's all over the place, and it's always distasteful, but there's no way we're going to talk about anyone who was running around being famous and whatnot in the 20th century and not step in all kinds of dog shit there.
Sure.
So we were talking about Gore Vidal. I don't have the chart for when that lawsuit was filed. I would like to look into more of that, but it is around the same time. This is the chart for the suicide of Ann Woodward, who commits suicide using cyanide, I believe. Because she knows that this article is coming out that Truman is publishing, that's going to talk about how she shot and killed her husband, most likely by accident, officially by accident. I mean, that was part of the problem. Oh, I don't have the chart of the shooting. It was in November of 55. But I can, we don't need to get too sidelined by it. Ann Woodward was one of these socialite women. And one night that there had been, I think, a break-in at her home. She had, you know, a rich husband and kids. Anyway, she and her husband had separate bedrooms. She heard something in the hallway. She called out her husband's name, didn't hear anything. She had a shotgun by her bed, and then she saw a figure in the hallway, and she shot. And it turned out she killed her husband. What she thought was who she thought was an intruder, and I guess in part because it was sort of a high society case, and you know, people didn't want the children to be any more scarred than they already were. She basically got off scot-free, and Truman dined out on the story that Edward had deliberately killed her husband, that he was going to leave her, and that she killed him on purpose. And you know, for years he sort of just smeared her, you know, at the lunch table, as it were, as it's depicted in this Feud TV show. But eventually, you know, it was going to come out in this article he was writing, and so she took her life, you know, as a result of that.
Yikes.
Yeah, and there's other stuff. I mean, you know, his closest friend, Babe Paley, was also discussed in the article, and she never spoke to him again. She died of lung cancer 3 years later, and so that was a really unrequited or, you know, tainted friendship that never healed.
Right. One thing, if we just look at Truman Capote's chart by itself, one of the things that I was a little confused by is the fact that, you know, if we look at the 11th house for signs of friendships and alliances, we can see that Jupiter is in Sagittarius in a day chart in that sign. This would reflect someone who would have friends in high places, you know, which certainly makes sense for Truman Capote, whose friends were celebrities and friends who were of, you know, the sort of upper crust of society and the sort of jet setting kind of lifestyle he had. But then he also betrayed his closest friends, and the people he kind of became closest to, you know, ended up kind of getting hurt by him. So I almost wonder if, well, okay, yeah, so we're gonna have to talk about that Mercury in just a second. But the other thing, I see you indicating, but the another way I think of looking at friendships, I feel like there's a way that the third house can describe friends as well, but more specifically, like close friends as opposed to sort of the acquaintances perhaps of the 11th. And that is a bit more interesting because we know then that Mars is the ruler of his third house, and Mars is that planet which has just stationed. We know that it's by that south node. We know it's angular in the chart. You know, that has a lot more difficult sort of potentials. And so I wonder, I mean, but I don't know. What do you think about that? What do you think about the social dimensions of the third house versus the 11th?
Yeah, the 11th house, like for instance, after he published In Cold Blood in 1966, Truman threw this huge ball at the Plaza Hotel long before Trump owned it.
Oh God, that guy.
Yeah.
All right, continue.
In 1966, it was called the Black and White Ball. It was a huge deal. Everyone who was famous and then some attended this ball, including all of Capote's swan friends, but even some of their enemies and stuff. It was very, like, it was a really interesting affair. And that to me is that Jupiter in Sagittarius in the 11th, like, you know, hosting
opulence.
Like it's still cited as one of the great social events of the 20th century.
Also want to note that Jupiter also rules the second house of money, and you know, obviously for most of his life he was extraordinarily wealthy.
You know, it was pretty good for a writer anyway.
Yeah,
and
very good.
You know, I mean, he was well off enough that, you know, Babe Paley could offer to buy him a house and he could say no. You know, if someone offered to buy me a house, I wouldn't be able to say no. You know, like I'd have to be like, well, okay. Anyway, long story short, that to me is that Jupiter in the 11th, the Aries third house. You know, I think I mean, he loved a very certain kind of what I consider to be a third house activity, which is meeting at your favorite local restaurant with a bunch of friends and gossiping. So that's
That's
more
it.
the third. That's what gets him into so much. And of course, the third house is the house of writing and publishing and stuff.
Sure.
But you know, just this is what got Truman into so much trouble. That's what's depicted in the TV show. I mean, heck, the article is called "The Cote Basque 1965." He's not talking about the Atlantic Ocean. He's talking about this shishi restaurant in New York City that I think is across from the Regent Hotel, the Upper East Side, I believe, or Midtown. And it's where he and his swans would meet for lunch all the time. And so even the article doesn't say, you know, the article isn't, you know, stories of the swans and their, you know, terrible husbands or whatever. The story refers to the title of the story refers to the restaurant where all this discourse happened, where all these stories were told and these secrets were exchanged. So I think that's the idea is that no, his friends are the 11th house, that Jupiter in the 11th house, but it's the trouble he caused, you know, getting involved in publishing gossip, basically. I mean, that was what people who even people who were Truman's allies were puzzled by Le Cote Basque, and they said, well, you know, you're just publishing gossip. What is this? You know, what are you doing?
Well, you know, he pioneered the true crime genre, and he didn't know it, but he was actually inventing the like nasty 2000s era celebrity blogs. Like he would have been Perez Hilton, you know, like imagine if Perez Hilton had more literary ability, you know, that might have been Truman Capote.
I mean, there had been, look, there had been the sort of the old school Hollywood columnists who were really more you know, in line with the studios. So they would I've got biographies of these women. There's I forget their names, but there's some of these old school columnists who did used to publish gossip, but it was a lot more sort of studio contained. And people were only ruined by scandal if they really sort of did something, you know, like the silent film star who was known as Fatty Arbuckle was, you know, wrongly sort of associated in what seemed to be a rape murder case. And that ruined his life. But, you know, something had to be really egregious like that for it to come out. So, yeah, in Truman's era, this is, you know, in the 70s, and the whole Hollywood cinema system is broken down, and you no longer have movie executives controlling the gossip columns. You have a point. There's something kind of like, you know, the toothpaste is out of the tube with Truman publishing this article and how it's going to lead gossip. I don't know if he's an absolute pioneer, but he is pretty sort of early on the train, I guess.
Right. Now, what were you going to say about the Mercury in the 8th placement? Because I had a few things to say about that, but I wonder what you have to say about it first.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's you know, the Mercury in the 8th, I think, has a lot to do with other people's baggage, being in the trade of using other people's stories. The second house being, you know, it's not just your money, it's kind of your value. And part of what Truman would trade him, and this is whether he's writing in Cold Blood or the Cote Basque, is trading on you know, other people's secrets and their baggage.
Right, the 8th house is hidden matters. This is someone who had access to like insider information or privileged information.
He cultivated it. You know, this is, I mean, what he did in Cold Blood. He befriended that whole town in Kansas and made, you know, they wound up welcoming him, even though they were kind of apprehensive. It helped that he had Harper Lee with him. But you know, they basically adopted him and took him under their wing. The murderers, you know, befriended him, and they gave him their story. Like he really, and you know, the society lady. So no matter who he wrote about, they were people that he'd become very, very intimate with, you know.
Right. So one of the things I wanted to say about that Mercury placement is not only it's rising ahead of the sun in a day chart, so it's of the sextant favor. It's in its own sign. It's in its own exaltation. It's even in its own decan. So this is a very powerful Mercury.
Yeah.
Right. And obviously, we'd sort of have to expect that for someone who became acclaimed as a writer. The only thing I couldn't figure out about this Mercury is how it connected to his career. And the only connection I can really make is the fact that we don't know the exact degree of where his midheaven was. So it's potentially possible that if he was born a little earlier, that Mercury might have been configured by a sextile to the MC,
Mm.
a little closer. Then there actually would be a more sort of angularized factor that Mercury would have this kind of closer connection to his reputation. It wouldn't be completely necessary for that to still make sense, but I I think just noting some of those factors about his Mercury really shows how that Mercury kind of stands out. Not to mention that it's in this superior square to Jupiter, so we know that
Yeah.
there's kind of positive interaction between these two planets in their own signs as well. So this is like someone who's able to really just has that is a real strength in that chart. And it's funny because if we contrast this with Jimmy Carter again, Jimmy Carter he had a completely different type of mercurial intelligence, right? Before he even got into politics,
He's a nuclear physicist.
yeah, he was a nuclear physicist. He he already had by the time he got into farming peanuts, he was already he had like a lot of scientific and technological sort of knowledge, and he kind of had to cram basically to learn how to take care of his deceased father's peanut farm. So he learned about agriculture and managed to get that going. So he obviously had a lot of kind of mercurial strengths as well. But and we can see in Jimmy Carter's case as well that Mercury would be, is sort of configured to the MC, and it's even implying in that case because the MC is moving forward through the sign. In any case, just wanted to
yeah
that connection.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I think the other thing about Truman's Mercury square Jupiter is it just, he makes the friends, but he also like undermines them,
Yeah.
because both these planets are equally strong in their own domicile. The Mercury is also configured to Uranus, so he does come out of the blue with some things and catches people off guard. But yeah.
Right. Well, I also think Mercury's wit, and he definitely had that.
Yeah.
He was sort of famous and notorious for being able to, tell a good story, even at a party or something. He was just known for being a jokester and always having a good line or a good quip.
That's how he finds himself in a lot of these, fancy dinner parties with rich exclusive friends and stuff. Is
right.
He spins a good yarn. He's fun at a party. But part of the reason is that he dishes gossip. That's
right.
And it's kind of his own worst enemy in that way. Okay, well, I wanted to get into some stuff with regard to his childhood.
So anyone looking at his chart can see that Moon Saturn conjunction is really prominent in his chart, and I wonder if you can think what that could mean for someone's connection or relationship with their mother in particular. But yeah, you want to take us through that, Nick?
Yeah. So Truman's childhood is God, it's really sad. It's really sad.
Pretty sad. Yeah.
So his parents basically both split on him, and he's stuck with relatives in Monroeville, Alabama, which is how he gets to know Harper Lee, who lives close by. Truman, even as a little boy, Truman is one of the characters in To Kill a Mockingbird, because it's a recollection from Harper Lee's childhood. But the family starts to break up when Truman's 6. His mother leaves for New York and leaves him with family. And this is, you can see he's 6 years old, so he's in a Leo perfection year. And this Mars at 11 Leo, which is presumably his ascendant or close thereof, is stationing right there while he's in the Leo perfection year. It's also interesting, since this is his first Leo perfection year, this is where this Venus-Neptune North Node thing is, which looks like a really lovely placement, but it seems to signify this abandonment that he had. This is the solar return before that, before his mother left for his 6th birthday. And yeah, you know, there seems to be something about that I guess because of the opposition to Mars and what have you.
Well, I mean, I think Moon Saturn would describe like abandonment by
For sure. Yeah.
one's mother,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
disowning by one's mother. And I
Sure.
think that's kind of validated by kind of what happens, you know, at
Yeah.
the return. But I think the Venus Neptune thing, you know, I think that's sort of more descriptive of the fact that, you know, he was with I mean, he was he was kind of notorious for saying that he'd had you know, he said that he like had a liaison with like Errol Flynn or something like that, and people didn't even know that was true. He said he was prone to kind of saying things that were hard to verify and unlikely
Right. Okay.
about his relationships. But he did, but you know, with Venus being in that sign, you know, he did have I mean, he was with what's his name, Jack Dunphy for
a long time. Yeah.
a long, long time. I mean, he was really, you know, his
Sure.
partner.
I'm thinking more about this though in terms of the perfections, just the
Oh, okay, gotcha.
perfections. You know, like no, I get you over the course of his life. Yeah, he did. He had a very close long-term relationship with Jack Dunphy that, you know, it stopped being physical after a certain extent, but that
And it
was like
was non-exclusive, which
no.
maybe counts. Maybe that's kind of the Neptune stuff, you know.
Yeah, yeah. But it was a very devoted, close friendship.
Right.
But I'm just thinking like this is his first Leo perfection year ever.
Right.
And he's got this lovely side to his chart, but this very hard Mars retrograde is happening while he's in the Leo perfection year.
Well, and that yeah. I mean,
Now,
yeah.
but by the time he's going to be 9 years old when this Moon Saturn perfection comes up. So these are his experiences. Like it's while he's in this Leo perfection year that his parents want getting divorced. This is later in that same Leo perfection year. You can see now the Sun and Jupiter come into Leo, and this is when his mother files to divorce his father. So this is all happening when he's 6. So it's still it has to do with this Leo perfection year. But she goes on. She marries.
Don't ignore whether eclipse occurred though. It occurred right around his sun. You know, so eclipses around your sun are going to potentially say something about the father. You know, the father's status in his life, and
exactly
he had no part of his life.
Yeah, and I mean, just the whole thing is being, you know, he's kind of being shunted aside. Then he has his next birthday where he turns 7. So now he's in a Virgo perfection year, which is where Neptune is, which is where his Mercury is. And this is when Jupiter's crossing his descendant is when his mother marries the guy who's going to be his stepfather. And then it's when he's this is the birthday when he's 9. He turns 9. He's in a Scorpio perfection year, and Mars is in Scorpio when he turns 9. And this is going to be the year that his mother files the adoption papers and changes his name. You can see look at where the nodes are on his ascendant axis. Saturn's on his ascendant as that birthday year begins. And he's in this Scorpio perfection year, and he's going to be adopted, and his name is going to change from Truman Parsons to Truman Capote. So that's what the you know, going to the Moon Saturn is to me, as much about his mom coming in and adopting him and bringing him to New York, and changing his name with this new stepfather.
Yeah, I want to bring attention to that first house transit again. You know, we know that the first house is about like the self and identity, and I think that's sometimes a hard thing to understand, like what that means practically. And I think this is a really good example of what that can mean practically, which is that your name, your branding, right?
Yeah.
You know, your identity, you know, is potentially sort of coming up for a change. So it makes sense that for someone who, you know, has this kind of transit like a solar eclipse in the first house, which we know would have happened because of where the nodes are transiting, this would be kind of up for discussion or up for review or something in that time. And even if it's not like a name change. You know, we still might we might even associate this with like the emergence of like a nickname for yourself or something like that. In this case, it was actually his legal name. One other thing I wanted to point out too about when he turned 7 is you'll notice that that was a Mercury return in the solar return. You get a Mercury return around 6 to 7 years old, and we know that Truman Capote was writing short stories by the time he was 8. So I assume he must have already been writing around age 7.
Right.
You know,
But I don't get, how is that a Mercury return? The Mercury is at 21 Libra when he's turning 7 here. Hold on.
the solar return you just had up for when he's 7 had Mercury in a return.
Oh, for 7, I'm sorry. That's why. Okay. This one. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, because Mercury, Mercury always returns when you're like 6,
Yeah.
7, 13, 14, 20, and so
Right.
forth.
Right. Okay, and this is when he starts writing. That makes sense.
Right.
And you can
right.
yeah, and you can see it sort of all happening to him. Okay. Yeah, I wanted to come up here and sort of give you an idea of that the Saturn is stepfathers, you know.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and yeah, being adopted and all that. Okay. Oh, the other thing about the adoption. Uranus and Taurus opposite his Saturn in Scorpio.
Right.
And he's about to, with him being adopted, this means he's going to move to New York. And so this is the beginning of the New Yorker Truman, you know. And then when we jump back to the death of where is she? When Anne Woodward commits suicide, Uranus is on his Saturn. So this is the you can almost see like Uranus and Taurus as he's becoming a New Yorker, and the Uranus up here when he's like punched his whole New York card, if you will. I mean, he'll keep living there, but he's not going to be the whole
end of his.
Yeah, there's some kind of journey in between 1934 and 1975 that sort of covers an arc of his life that I think is really notable.
Wow.
The Uranus to Saturn. Yeah.
Great observation.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's good. Well, and it's especially notable that Saturn is his ascendant ruler, so it's literally pertaining to him in particular. But also
these
houses.
These huge changes. I mean, Uranus to his 4th means he's going to be living in the place that he's going to call home for the rest of his life. And then Uranus in the 10th is like, well, so much for all the, the high society lifestyle you've been having. And
right. That's
the great reputation, and so much for that. So yeah, there's something really interesting about that whole journey of Uranus through there. Okay. Now, the other thing that you and I noticed when we were talking about his chart before the live stream was Mars. Mars in different signs seems to have a really powerful, sort of presence for him. And I tracked all the Mars retrogrades of his life. But if we were to look at Mars by sign, for instance, Mars in Scorpio, over the course of his life, we get some really interesting results, not least of which is here we are. And then I'll just put this up after that. So when it comes to the transit of Mars through Scorpio, there have just been a few of them. Mars doesn't spend that much time in Scorpio, but it winds up being in some really interesting places in his life. For instance, when Truman's mother dies, he's 29 years old. He's having his Saturn return in the 6th house perfection year, of course, which is ruled by the moon. And we have Mars and Saturn are both in Scorpio in January of 54 when his mother dies.
Dang. I would also want to point out that in a Cancer perfection year, you want to pay attention to where lunar eclipses occur, and you can see that this is eclipse season, basically. This happened one day before a solar eclipse in Capricorn, his 12th
Right.
house, which would potentially be followed by a late lunar eclipse in the 6th. But in any case, the
Yeah.
fact that both malefics would have recently conjoined his moon in the time that his mother's health was failing, and then finally passed with that conjunction beginning to pass, is really interesting how it connects back to the theme of the moon as representing his mother, and the Saturn return generally as this time of the completion of that sort of cycle of abandonment.
Yeah. Yeah,
um
that's one way to put it for sure.
yeah
Yeah, it's interesting given that he has a natal moon Saturn conjunction, and that his mother had such I mean, she had a huge impact on him. He
right
worshipped her, but she was also, not available, to put it mildly. She was also someone who gave him a very hard time about his, effeminate demeanor and stuff. Tried to have him, quote unquote, cured,
yeah so
that kind of thing.
and this just kind of made him more resilient.
Yeah, no, really,
you
it
know
did. Yeah, really, really did. But yeah, it's especially interesting because Mars Saturn in Scorpio does not happen very often. But one of the only other times it would happen in his life
yeah
was not long before he died. He died in 1984. Now, when he died, Mars was already in Sagittarius, but over the course of the summer leading up to his death, he died in August. And all through the spring and summer of 1984, leading up to his death, there had been a Mars retrograde in Scorpio, co-present with Saturn. And this is basically his second Saturn return. This is 30 years after his mother dies. At this point, he is 59, which is a 12th
highlighting
house.
Saturn's position, and that's the Saturn return again. This time it's him rather than the mother. I think if I'd known as much as this about his chart, and I was like looking at his chart, if I was a practicing astrologer in the 1980s, I'd be like, oh my god, like what the hell is going to happen? And it would have probably been really frustrating because I'm like, Mars went retrograde then, nothing happened, but like for whatever reason it was like a little delayed, or there was some other thing kind of going on. But we know that I'm sure that that time frame where Mars was conjunct Saturn and going retrograde in proximity to Saturn would have been, I mean, that's obviously when things must have been going downhill, where things were sort of accelerating towards the inevitable kind of conclusion.
Very much so. He died at the home of Joanna Carson, Johnny Carson's ex-wife, and she wanted to call him an ambulance, and he said, "Don't." He said, he said, I really just want to go. I'm tired. I don't want to be in any hospitals. I don't want to be on any medication. I don't want any surgeries. I just want to go. Just leave me be. And so she did, and he died. So I think there's something about the way he went. Like he could conceivably have had medical intervention, but he was at this point
he chose.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's quite the intense way to go. And yeah, I think in the months leading up to his death, during that Mars retrograde, it was just everything was kind of coming apart, I guess is the best way to put it.
Right. I mean, really, the beginning of the 80s is kind of when he started becoming more reclusive, after everything that had occurred in the late 70s, which I thought it was again interesting when you compare that to Jimmy Carter, who lost the election in 1980 and faded from the national stage at the same time that Truman Capote is withdrawing from the world and becoming more of a recluse.
Yeah. Well, speaking of that Mars, I mean, the something very particular happens in 1980. I'm not sure what it did to Truman, but what happened in 1980 was there was a Mars retrograde. Yet you had I'll just put this up here. I know we're pivoting from
I know. Sorry
Truman to Jimmy. No, but that's okay. No. This is an important
But it's interesting, right? There's
So in November of 79, Mars is here in Leo, conjunct Jimmy Carter's Neptune and Venus and North Node, and of course Truman's as well. But this is when the hostage crisis begins, and this Mars is about to go retrograde in Virgo in January, and then retrograde back into Leo. And so what happens is when Mars does station direct in Leo, uh, um, Mars is just stationed direct in Leo, opposite the natal Mars, and this is when Jimmy Carter had to he tried to get these Marines to stage a rescue, and the copter crashed. The rescuers, I think they were Marines. I don't want to say anything false, but whoever the military division was who were tasked with rescuing the hostages in Tehran, that copter crashed, and the mission was aborted, and it was kind of a disgrace. And some people think like this is when Jimmy really sort of lost the Americans' public's trust. So this was a Mars station direct with the North Node opposite the natal Mars. I don't know what was happening to Trudeau at this point in 1980, but for Jimmy Carter, it's something very, very, very specific.
Now, in 1980, Truman actually had a seizure.
Oh, okay.
He had a hallucination based seizure, which caused him to withdraw from.
Do you have a date for that?
Yeah, we're trying to find the date for that, but it was in 1980.
Okay, let me look in my Truman books here.
Epilepsy, thought to be induced by drug and alcohol use. When was that? And he was hospitalized and everything. I'm looking on Google, and the first thing I type is about Truman, and the first thing people are asking about him is, why did he talk like that? I just think it's funny that still in Google Trends, people are still wondering why he talked like that.
Okay. Yeah, I'm looking here. He's making up with his, I'm not seeing anything here about
epilepsy.
It must have been at the end of the year or something.
Okay, now I'm seeing one for August 1981, but then I'm still seeing 1980.
Yeah, I'm not seeing anything. I'm looking at what he was going through in 1980, and there's nothing of that. Nothing of that nature here. Look up seizure. Okay, our our audience must be finding this tedious.
Yeah, sorry.
I don't know what. Okay. Here we are. Seizure. Before the summer of 1981 ended, his prophecy seemed close to fulfillment. On the morning of August 1st, he suffered a convulsive seizure, something like an epileptic attack, in front of the Sagaponack General Store. Okay, so that's August 1st, 1981.
Right.
Although nothing to do with this Mars retrograde that I'm
right. Although I will say more of these links are talking about 1980. I guess this must have happened.
They're wrong. I went through in Gerald Clark's book what he was going through in 1980, and there's no stroke in 1980.
Okay,
there's no seizure. He's doing other stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Well, he's not related to this Mars retrograde then. So I'm curious then, if we look at that date, August 1st, 1981.
Sure.
What was going on for Truman Capote?
Sorry, August 1st, 1981. Okay, so with this, he's nearly 47.
You really? Oh yeah, 47.
No, that can't be right. 57. What am I saying? He's 57. nearly 57. So he's still 56.
This is just
He's
after.
in the Libra perfection year, and Saturn and Jupiter are on his sun.
Wait a sec. Wait.
No, wait, or 50 is
No, 57 would
56,
be.
but he's still 56. It's a month before he turns
Oh,
57.
right,
So
right.
he's still 56. No,
Yeah.
he's still in the Libra perfection year.
So Venus is transiting through
And
the
it's Saturn
ninth.
and Jupiter coming to his sun.
Right. Well, Saturn is certainly the planet of like saying like kind of
Yeah.
like stop.
You've gone
You've
too
gone
far.
too far.
Yeah.
And that would also, I also think it's interesting just that it happened so close to a solar eclipse in Leo. This is like
Yeah.
2 days or so after the solar eclipse in Leo, which would have squared his moon roughly. Mars going through the 6th generally is not a wonderful transit to have, especially
And
since
it's
it's squares
squaring
sun.
it's squaring a sun.
Oh,
and
actually,
squaring-
actually, that's a Mars Saturn square aligned with his sun. Well, okay, that makes a little more
Yeah,
sense.
Exactly.
Also interesting is that Uranus would have. Well, we don't know exactly where Uranus, rather where his midheaven really is. But
I
this is
think
potentially a
it's
clue.
there. I keep seeing that there was the Mars retrograde when his mother left him. There's a Saturn station on his ascendant in the middle of the custody
Yeah.
thing. I think the midheaven is probably there.
One of the things I thought was quite a little compelling for the midheaven is if you look at the date of the premiere of the In Cold Blood movie, because you'll see that's like in 1967.
And that's also I think whoops, Jimmy Carter. More Jimmy Carter. Yeah, In Cold Blood is
premieres.
There's the book, but here we are, December of 67.
So what I think is interesting about this is it puts Neptune right around the degree of where the midheaven would be if he actually was born pretty close to 3 p.m. I mean,
Right.
yeah. Which I think is interesting because Neptune I always think of as like the planet of cinema. Oh yeah, not to mention Mars being right around that same area. This is like when his greatest work, ends up sort of reaching a mass audience and becoming sort of mainstream, for everyone who didn't read the book. Now there's like the real wide dissemination of this work. And another thing that I thought was kind of interesting about the fact that this came out in 1967 is we know that he was portrayed by Philip Seymour Hoffman,
Right.
who was also born in 1967, which means that the actor who portrayed him in a movie also has that same kind of Neptune close to Truman Capote's own midheaven.
No, I meant to look at the other actors who've played Truman.
Sure.
Because there's also Tom Harrington, and then this other movie, Infamous. I forget the name of the actor who played
And in
Truman.
Feud, the Tom Hollander, I believe.
Hollander, sorry, that's it. Tom Hollander.
Not to be confused with Tom Holland, the guy playing Spider-Man right now.
I know. I was like, that's not Spider-Man. What's
Tom
he doing?
Holland would not be able to play a good Truman
Truman
Capote
Capote
right now.
No.
Too young.
I could imagine what's his name from The Big Bang Theory. Sheldon.
Sheldon, yeah, maybe
he could play a young Truman Capote if he dyed his
Yeah.
hair blonde, but he's too tall. Truman was very short. I don't know who could play Truman as a young man. That was one of the things that bothered me about the Feud show, actually, is I think to really do a good story about the Swans, you still need you also need to talk about young Truman Capote and how he knew Gloria Vanderbilt and Una O'Neill, and these were his teenage friends, his New York friends when he was a young guy. And they're sort of like they're the Swans too. They also show up in the Cote Basque article, and so there's elements of La Cote Basque and the whole Swan thing that goes back to young Truman Capote, whereas the TV series really just deals with him in the 60s and 70s, unfortunately. So this is Philip Seymour Hoffman's chart with Truman Capote, and yeah, you can see like the Mars on the Saturn with the nodes.
And I also think it's interesting that his moon, would likely be in Aquarius. Obviously, we don't have Hoffman's time, but
no.
But assuming his moon is in Aquarius, that could make sense for someone who is like picking up the mannerisms and presentation of this other person. So I thought that was interesting. In any case, that the person who would be bringing his story in a kind of new way just happened to be born in the same year where Neptune would be making that same transfer to his midheaven when his greatest work is kind of made to,
Right.
put to film. I want to respond to a couple of the comments here. So
Yeah,
Laura
please do.
says on YouTube, Capote was an openly gay man. I'd imagine the early 80s would have been a difficult time. I don't think the 70s, the 60s, the 50s,
Yeah,
the
no,
40s would have
he went to the 50s,
yeah, I
like
mean, I
yeah,
know what you mean. The 80s, yeah, would be bad, but
I mean the 80s were bad because of I mean, the AIDS crisis was the
right.
worst thing. And if you look at contemporaries of Capote like Rock Hudson or Liberace and what they went through, I know what you mean. But Truman was, to my knowledge, spared the AIDS experience. I don't know,
It was
maybe
yeah, it was all a bad time, Kate says. Um,
yeah, yeah. But I think he endured far worse eras than than the 80s.
right.
And really was spared. I think some of the worst things about the 80s.
Laura says, I'm referring to HIV, AIDS, the stress, possibly losing friends, etc. For sure. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah,
I'm
no,
looking. I'm looking for other actors who've played Capote. What's the movie I've just been watching? Is it not called Infamous? Um, yeah, I thought it was called Infamous. Yeah, it is called Infamous. I'm trying to
Toby
find the name of.
Jones.
Sorry, what's his name?
Toby Jones.
Toby Jones.
And Toby Jones, he was
September 7th,
born.
66.
Yes.
He's very good too. I like the movie with him. It's interesting that he had, to have had this many actors portray you
Right.
this far in. No, Toby Jones is British. Okay, so I'll put up his chart next to Truman's, but I also want to find what's his name who played him on Swans. Okay, just a moment here, and I'll share this. All right, so this is Truman and Toby Jones. Toby Jones, had the misfortune to be. I think his movie was, overshadowed by Philip Seymour Hoffman's effort. Even though the Toby Jones movie has people like Sandra Bullock in the cast, and it's a pretty
Mhm.
good supporting cast. But he's just not as well. I don't know anything else that he's done. He looks somewhat familiar to me, but he's very well chosen to play.
He he plays Zola in the Captain America movies and in the MCU. He's
He plays who?
Zola. He
Oh,
plays
the scientist or whatever.
he's kind of like the Red Skull's
Okay.
henchman.
Oh, okay.
But
I'd
anyway,
forgotten
yeah.
that. Yeah, yeah, okay.
that's
Yeah, yeah,
that's what I remember him from. Like I'm like,
okay.
oh
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
he's in the
That's
MCU.
bringing back some memories. Okay.
But in any case, I love the fact that Toby Jones has like the same Mercury placement and the same Venus placement, and that his Sun, Uranus, Pluto conjunction, all happens right on Capote's Mercury. So he must have been hooking into some, other, well, literally aspect of Capote's chart. Are you putting up Tom Hollander now?
Yeah, yeah. And Tom Hollander, it's funny. He's born pretty close to Philip Seymour Hoffman. So I'll have him. Interesting. He's also English. So two of these, Philip Seymour Hoffman's the only American who's portrayed him, which I think is interesting. I mean, this matters less and less these days. These actors are so good at accents. It used to be a real kind of like specialty, but now it's like it seems like every actor has to be really good. Certainly with American accents. Okay, so Tom Hollander is born like a month after Philip Seymour Hoffman. So you've got the same Mars Neptune here.
Wow.
You've got the node, maybe even the moon, still sort of locked in there.
Weird. So they ended up choosing someone who was kind of like, well, not only born in proximity to Philip Seymour Hoffman, but also has a lot of Toby Keith, not Toby Keith,
Toby Jones.
Toby Jones. Jesus. Toby Jones. Toby Jones's placements. Like, that is pretty weird.
Don't tell me Toby Keith is also played by a British guy.
Oh, please don't. Yeah, I'm sure we'll get the posthumous movies, I think, coming out.
Yeah. That is interesting. I mean, to have had that many actors play you. I thought Tom Hollander's very good. I don't know who I would say is my favorite. I mean, Philip Seymour Hoffman, just generally speaking, is one of my favorite actors.
Yeah, I mean, he's pretty overall excellent. Like, I haven't watched the other two yet, so I wouldn't be able to say which one I like better, but that role. But
I think Toby Jones really just resembles him a bit more, so it's a bit more believable. And Tom Hollander does this great. What Tom Hollander gets right is Truman's laugh. Truman's got this naughty kind of chuckle, and Tom Hollander employs it in all the right places and gets it like just spot on. So it's just interesting. I'm not going to play like Olympic judge here and try to decide who does it best, but they're all pretty interesting. Should we look at some of the swans, some of the synastry that Truman actually has with some of these women that are portrayed, and we can even look at some of the actresses who play the swan.
Sure, yeah. In fact, some of these we've actually already looked at, interestingly enough, fairly recently.
We did? Who did we look at?
Chloe Sevigny.
Oh yeah, we did look at Chloe Sevigny. This is true. Actually, I gotta say, Chloe Sevigny, I think, is my favorite part of this series, and part of it is just she's really cast against type. Chloe Sevigny plays CZ Guest, who's like, unlike most of the swans, if you will, unlike most of the swans, CZ Guest really was already a Boston Brahmin. She didn't have to like marry into this world the way Slim Keith did or Babe Paley. So she's really like, old money kind of thing, and into horses and gardening and what have you. And Chloe Sevigny is, kind of like, a Hollywood bad girl kind of thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I first saw her in that movie Kids when she was, really young. And yeah, I mean, she's a really talented actress, but she tends to go for roles that are really sort of provocative, or she plays characters who are, who have an edge to them. But in CZ Guest, she's playing like, the most, I mean, not an unlikable woman, but someone who's just like so sheltered. And I think the worst thing that ever happened to CZ Guest was some of her husband's investment in the TV show. They say it's a tax thing, but that's apparently not true. It's just some investments went wrong and they lost, some chunk of money. They were still fine, but they were forced to auction off a bunch of artworks, and this was something like just horribly embarrassing to CZ Guest and made her cry. Look, none of us we've all had money problems, but we haven't had the kind of money problems where like, our creditors just take some like old, Rubens paintings or whatever, and the thing's paid off. So this is the kind of person that she was. Am I sharing the screen? Can you see this?
Yeah, I can. So there's still, I was wondering, so the thing she seems to be kind of aligning with there is maybe like the Mars and Scorpio placement.
Yeah.
That's somehow her access point to this character.
Yeah, but they're very different, the Mars points, because whereas CZ Guest was born shortly before Mars went retrograde in Scorpio. Remember, Truman is really, his chart is touched whenever Mars is in Scorpio. That's a big deal for Truman. And CZ Guest, who stays loyal to him, you can see in the show this was also true, but in real life, she wasn't featured in the Cote Basque story. So even though she was friends with the other swans, and I think she did, reprimand him. She's born 24 days before Mars went retrograde in Scorpio, whereas Chloe Sevigny is born so close to the conjunction.
Yeah.
Within,
Not,
I think in 74 the conjunction was at 29 Libra, but it's very, very close here.
yeah.
These 1974 Scorpios have this going on. So yeah, I think that's an interesting one. Then there's I'll just go to the natal file here, and I'll put up Naomi Watts and Babe Paley. Whoops, I just spelled Naomi Watts' name wrong. Do you know some rock trivia involving Naomi Watts?
No. Was she involved with someone?
In a manner of speaking. Have you ever heard Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon?
Yes.
Okay, Naomi Watts' father was Pink Floyd's road manager. So those voices you hear on the album, like you hear a woman at one point say, that guy was cruising for a bruising. That's Naomi Watts' mother. And Naomi Watts' father also has one of the famous lines that you hear on tape. I forget if he's the guy who's talking about a fist fight or if he's saying, I've always been mad or whatever, but her father or both her parents are part of the voices on Dark Side of the Moon because her father was their road manager. Okay. So Naomi Watts, who we do have a time for, and Babe Paley.
Have you ever thought of applying to compete in one of these like trivia TV games? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like you wouldn't do terribly.
I can tell you.
Name that transit.
I am not, there's no one in my family who wants to play Trivial Pursuit with me because I'm a very gracious loser, but I'm a terrible winner. And unfortunately, I'm not a very gracious winner. And I'm basically banished. I'm banished from ever playing with them. So this is Naomi Watts and Babe Paley, who she plays. She does a very good job. But I found it, it's a curious role. So Babe Paley was this sort of mega Cancer stellium you can see here. Whereas Naomi Watts is the Virgo Libra routine. Anyway, any thoughts?
I just wanted to respond to one of the comments. Behavens asked, "What do you mean by swan?" And the answer is that this was the name that Truman gave to his friends who were these like really wealthy like housewives who sort of married into this sort of celebrity world, right?
Yeah, American aristocratic women. Babe Paley, Slim Keith, CZ Guest, Lee Radziwill.
Because they're very elegant and luxurious, sort of like swans. Swans.
That was what he called them. That was what he called them.
It's kind of a.
There's a really funny part of the TV series where James Baldwin, sort of comes into town to help Truman, find himself, and give him a good talking to. And James Baldwin does some research into real swans and gives Truman all these facts about how swans actually are and how territorial they are and how they look so graceful, but it's actually a real struggle for them to swim and keep afloat. It's a really, I can't do it any justice, but I think that was my favorite part of the whole series was James Baldwin talking about real actual swans to Truman and dispensing these swan facts. These are in the days before Wikipedia. So it really was something that, James Baldwin had to go probably to the New York Public Library and look this up. So anyway, that's Naomi Watts and Babe Paley.
Something that does occur to me about these charts is I think it's interesting that Naomi Watts has this kind of out of sign conjunction between Mercury in an air sign and Venus in a water sign.
Mm.
and Bay
And
Paley
so does Bay
has
Paley. Yeah, yeah.
a kind of Mercury Venus out of sign conjunction across air and water signs rather. But otherwise, I at least unless there's something I'm missing, I don't necessarily see a similar kind of connection like I see with
Yeah.
seeing Chloe 70 in
I
her
agree.
chart.
Yeah, I
Um
agree. Shall we look at
but I
Diane
really like
Lane?
Naomi Watts as an actress, and
Oh, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
she she may be someone else you can look at later on.
So then there's Diane Lane plays Slim Keith. Now, this one is interesting to me. Slim Keith is an interesting figure because she was married to the film director um, Howard Hawks, and he directed Lauren Bacall's first movie, To Have and Have Not, with Humphrey Bogart. And in that movie, I've seen it a couple of times. I saw it back in film school when I was young. Humphrey Bogart calls Lauren Bacall's character Slim. And apparently the whole character is based on Slim Keith. And Slim Keith had also been Ernest Hemingway's lover. And To Have and Have Not is written by Ernest Hemingway. So it's a movie written by her former lover, directed by her husband. And Lauren Bacall basically becomes famous by being who Slim Keith really was in real life, if that makes any sense. And so Diane Lane plays Slim Keith. And yeah, this is kind of interesting. We don't have a birth time for Diane Lane. There was some contradiction for Slim Keith. Some sources said she was born in 1916, but her tombstone literally says she's born in 1917, and her autobiography says she was born in 1917. So I don't know where this 1916 thing comes from. But this is definitely her chart, and this is her synastry with Diane Lane. Yeah, funny. I almost, if based on looks, I would have cast Chloe Sevigny as Slim Keith and Diane Lane maybe as CZ Guest. But that's just based on looks. I don't think Diane Lane looks like her much, but she plays the role really well.
It looks like depending on when Slim Keith was actually born, she might have been born with the moon closer to Mars, which would be somewhat similar to Diane Lane's. Oh wait, pardon me. I got those the wrong way around. Yeah, they both were born around Moon Mars conjunctions, but that's about all I can notice just off the top of my head.
Right. Yeah. There's a Saturn Neptune opposite Diane Lane's sun, but it's not super sharp. It's not like we saw with Truman and Philip Seymour.
No.
All right, and then there's Callista Flockhart plays Lee Radziwill. I'm wondering, do I even have Callista Flockhart's chart? I was never much of an Ally McBeal.
I actually was.
Did
I didn't. Well, my mom really liked it, so we saw.
I've got her. I've got her. Okay, I've got
her. Basically, whenever there was someone around who it was because of that show that we started singing the the Wicked Witch theme whenever someone arrived on screen, or arrived in our lives, who we, maybe didn't want to come around,
Okay.
That we sort of got that from that show. But anyway, all right, yeah, let's take a look at.
No, Callista Flockhart's her data's rated C. Oh yeah. That's probably not right. I should. That source has been discredited in the past, so let's not get into that. So yeah, this is Callista Flockhart plays Lee Radziwill, and Lee Radziwill was Jackie Kennedy's sister. Lee Radziwill had a long affair with Aristotle Onassis, and then introduced him to her sister, and then he wound up marrying her sister. So that's that gives you some insight into Lee's world. So with here we get both of them have the Mars and Virgo.
Mars, yeah.
and in fact, like Lee Radziwill has the Mars retrograde in Virgo, and Callista Flockhart's Mars would go retrograde, when probably by secondary progression, it might be retrograde by now. Like we saw Diane Lane is 2 months younger than Callista Flockhart and has the Mars retrograde in Virgo.
Wow.
But yeah, that's Lee Radziwill is interesting to me in the sense that she's that women born at this time of 1933, you get some really interesting ones that it's that Mars retrograde in Virgo that she has right on the ascendant. People like Nina Simone, Yoko Ono, Kim Novak, really, really powerful women. Nichelle Nichols of Star Trek is born just a little bit before that retrograde happens, but also with that Mars.
So wait
these really powerful women here.
So 70.
and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, no less.
Oh, okay, so 70 has the same Mars placement as the person she's playing, and Callista Flockhart is the same Mars position as the person she's playing. And then Diane Lane, or I forget who we were just looking at, but they were both born close to Moon Mars conjunctions. So it seems to be a Mars theme here, where well, and I guess swans are supposed to be kind of elegant, but also somewhat dangerous, right? I mean, you don't want to piss off one.
No.
Like the whole point of this show, right, is that they are these like dangerous women who are out to get justice and revenge, against Truman Capote for airing dirty laundry.
Yeah, it's also occurring to me, like, apart from Chloe Sevigny having Mars and Scorpio, yeah, like Naomi Watts and Callista Flockhart, all three of these women have Mars in Virgo.
Okay.
All three of them have Mars in Virgo. Diane Lane's is close to the retrograde station at 27 Virgo. But yeah, even like Naomi and Callista have the Mars in early Virgo. So yeah, I think there's something about Mars in there, generally speaking.
Right. Well, and it's just interesting for the kind of premise of the show, right? They're not playing I don't know, it's not like a drama or romance or something necessarily. Like this is kind of
it is a drama. There's drama involved, but it's true. Yeah. I mean, that they're playing sort of middle-aged older women who mostly sit around a lunch table and complain about how they've been betrayed by Truman Capote. That's a good deal of it. It's not like any of them have action scenes. There's no car chases, or anything like that. They don't go into combat.
Oh, Kate just posted a really interesting comment. She said that a Diane Lane quote from an interview on this role. She said, "I get sweaty just thinking about the scale of the duplicity, feeling one way about somebody while you act another way in front of them. That's like being an assassin." I mean, that's pretty martial. there's I don't know. I think the Mars theme is an interesting one.
Yeah.
For the type of roles or the type of story that's being kind of told here, it sounds like. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, very interesting.
Right,
very interesting indeed. Who else? I guess that
what about I thought the connections of Truman Capote's charts to the Killers charts.
That's exactly what I was about to bring up. That's how funny. Yeah, we have time charts for both of the In Cold Blood Killers, and we can have a look at that. We can even go into looking at the actors who played them, but we don't.
That's it. We'll stick to the real people.
Yeah. So this is Truman and Perry, who Truman became closest to Perry. Perry's the oldest of the two killers. And he's the one who committed the murders. And some people think that Perry and Truman even became lovers because they did spend a lot of time together. And Truman, again, going back to the subject of Truman getting really intimate with the subjects he's writing about. Perry seems to have really, left a strong mark on him. It occurs to me, actually, the killers were executed April 14th, 1965, just as Mars was coming out of that retrograde in Virgo. That relates to all those actions. Anyway,
Yeah,
let's not get
right.
wrapped up in that. Anyway, you can see Perry's got the sun on Truman's moon opposite Jupiter, and also
Mm.
the ascendant Saturn right on this Jupiter. So there's a lot of Jupiter Saturn stuff going on.
Well,
in
and
their
sun
synastry.
moon just by itself, I think when someone's sun is on your moon or your moon is
Yeah,
in someone's sun, that someone you just kind of feel
yeah. There's a natural
completes
affinity.
some kind of complementary part to yourself. I
Yeah,
also want to note that Capote was born with the Venus Neptune conjunction, while Perry Smith was born with the Venus Neptune square. So there's
yeah,
sort of a Venus Neptune kind of signature, and I think that even if they weren't lovers, I think they I think it may also be appropriate to note that like there may be some extent to which Truman might have kind of faked sort of interest
yeah.
or
In a way, yeah,
put
yeah,
on a kind of a show because he just wanted to get access to him. At least that's certainly the way it's presented in the 2005 Capote film. That he kind of tricked them into giving him material for his book, and
yeah.
um
When the
so yeah,
when the
there's
time
Neptune
comes,
theme there.
yeah, when the time comes for their execution, he's really reluctant to go, and they're really, they want him to be there. That's how close he has come to them. That Perry Smith and Richard Hickok. Here, I'll show you the other killers chart. They really want Truman to, and in the end, he does. But it's kind of because they guilt him into it. So this is the other killer, Richard Hickok, who was also executed that day. And I'll show you the chart for their execution. Truman did go. He went back out to Kansas one last time to witness the execution. So here they are.
They were executed on the same day.
Yeah, a few minutes apart. So yeah, there's that Mars retrograde in Virgo I'm talking about, and that triple conjunction. And yeah, Truman's there and witnesses it, and talks about it on occasion. He writes about it in the book, and then also talks about it in I saw him on Johnny Carson talking about it, about witnessing the execution. So it makes a really big impact on him.
So
But
he was
yeah,
age
but
40 at this point, which would mean that he
right.
was in a fifth house year, which would highlight the transits of Mercury, and his natal Mercury is in the eighth. So he's like kind of and Mercury's retrograde in the third. So he's like kind of roped in to this development of what, not only watching the execution, but also kind of hanging on bated breath about whether their executions would be stayed or not, because
Right.
he wanted to get this book out but couldn't do it until it kind of creates a perverse incentive. That's why I kind of said it's like some sort of weird bizarre version of the G.R.R. Martin fiasco, where Game of Thrones was making a show of a book that hadn't been written yet. In this case, he had a book but couldn't finish it until reality had showed him what would happen.
Right.
Kind of one
Right.
of the perils of basing a book on current events. But yeah, wow. This Mars retrograde opposite Saturn and Pisces come up quite a few times for us.
Yeah.
In the past few sessions. We know this is also the same one that we saw the assassination of Malcolm X under,
right.
a little earlier, about a month earlier.
Yeah, 6 weeks earlier. Yeah. That's absolutely right. That Mars retrograde in Virgo. I mean, this is I wouldn't mind doing some episodes at some time where we just talk about specific little periods in history, and this would definitely be a contender. The Mars retrograde of early 1965. If you come here, like, okay, here's there's the hangings for the murder that are happening April 15th of 65, but you can see like so many other things that are really important to the story of the 60s are happening. the Viet Cong, the American troops landing in Vietnam in real numbers, the Marines being sent there. The I think the Beatles do LSD, and the first, the Beatles do LSD, and George Harrison discovers the sitar. All these things that are going to be sort of part of the what make the 60s the 60s, be they Vietnam, Beatles and LSD, all this stuff. It's all happening at this time. The Stones are about to do Satisfaction. Bob Dylan is about to do Like a Rolling Stone. So it's just a very interesting little turning point. It would be, I think, an interesting exercise to look at that period and look at a bunch of different charts.
That same Mars retrograde, that was when there was an earthquake and it caused this dam to collapse in Chile, and was one of the deadliest earthquake induced dam collapses. And of course, this is Mars retrograde conjunct Uranus and Pluto opposite Saturn and Pisces, right? So it's we can obviously tell, it's even just at a cursory glance, that Mars retrograde kind of stands out as being potentially one of the most concerning of the 20th century. It wasn't just about Mars, sort of war and violence and catastrophes like you sort of maybe tend to expect from Mars, but it had, like you said, all these other sort of undercurrents as well that just made that period of time just so distinctive. And in a century with 2 world wars, the 60s still stands out as this kind of as the important one.
And some of that is boomer nonsense, but not all of it. I mean,
not all of it.
Really
not all of it.
No.
Like a lot of the modern world can kind of, I mean, even the internet, ARPANET is traced back to the 60s, like in the Uranus-Pluto conjunction that gives us the internet later on. So it, I mean, that's the sort of when going to the moon, it becomes possible. The sort of advances in spaceflight that sort of happened in that time are these are the things that will become just obvious, when looking back that, well, that's obviously when it started.
Even just things like, TV and cinema going to color from black and white.
Right.
And, I because of being born in the late 60s, I grew up thinking like, oh, my birth brought in color TV. Like the world before me was black and white, whereas I came into the color world. It's hard to explain, but
right.
Although it's an
I
impression
gotta say,
I had as a child.
At the same time, I wouldn't say I've been disappointed by the Gen Xers or the late boomers / early Gen Xers who came in the 60s, who were born in the 60s. But I almost wish I would almost have expected a little more from. I mean, they show up all over the place when you start looking for them, but it's interesting. Like I feel like in the sort of discourse over generations, like the boomers and the millennials get a lot of attention and they're very at odds, but weirdly everyone kind of skips over the
because we're much smaller. We don't have the same kind of cultural impact. We're defined by our by our small numbers as much as the boomers and millennials are identified by their large ones.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, we grew up like in the 80s. I was a teenager in the 80s, and it was the era of MTV and all that. But that was all boomer controlled, and so you grew up knowing like, oh, like, yeah, everything's sort of corporate and commercial and packaged and made by this large group of grown-ups who don't actually know what we want out of the culture. So yeah, it's a weird thing, but like we really grew up under the shadow of the boomers. And it's really funny to hear millennials gripe about the boomers, because it's like we were literally griping about them before you were born.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on exactly where you draw the lines, sure. I think I would say like Gen X begins around like 1965 to roughly 1980. Is that
Yeah,
a fair assessment?
it's usually given 1964, but I don't really. I tend to think of it as being that Mars retrograde in Virgo.
Yeah,
If you're
I
born
tend to think
before
of
the Mars retrograde in Virgo, or if you're born after that Mars retrograde in Virgo, that's kind of the dividing line.
right,
Yeah, but it is a slippery thing, you know.
right.
Is someone born in 1979 really a Gen Xer? You know,
Yeah, the kind of an elder millennial, as
yeah,
Elijah
I you know,
Schwartzman would say,
yeah, yeah, you know,
or baby Gen X. I tend to think of like Gen X as being like the slackers in the 90s,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
the
yeah.
90s slackers.
That's who they were. Yeah. Yeah, you know, like if you had ripped jeans and you listened to Nirvana and like all your record collection was, you know, came from record labels that were like little mom and pop places all over the continent, then yeah, you
Yeah,
know,
I
that's
guess
who
I
you
just always figured like, okay, well, when the slacker generation like actually gets a shot, like, will it take it? Will it move us out of destruction? I don't know. It doesn't feel like
I
that's
think
gonna
I
happen.
think we you know, look, the Gen X were the people who like took video games from the arcade and put them in the home. You know what I mean? We're like we set up the infrastructure for a lot of
You
what.
played Atari, so we could run
Exactly,
on
exactly.
PlayStation.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. You know, and it's Gen Xers who make your South Parks and, you know, your other
that's true.
millennial entertainment.
Yeah, no, that's
You know,
true.
they designed the video games that everyone plays
That's true.
and the consoles and so yeah, there's um yeah, I think you know, Gen Xers served as a kind of cultural fountain for a lot of what millennials you know, drink from.
Laura just said on YouTube, Pac-Man walked so Sonic could run.
That's
Uh,
right. That's right.
Funny.
Yeah,
Um,
Carter is the longest living president. I think the greatest man to ever be president. He wasn't the greatest president, but I think he's the greatest human being to ever have been U.S. president. Is my feeling about him.
I mean, yeah, I mean he could have done other things with his time, but instead he
Yeah,
made houses for Habitat for Humanity. I
yeah,
think there's it's pretty blameless.
yeah, yeah. Quite a special guy. All right. Well, what else have we? Does anyone have more questions about Truman? Yeah, we didn't get into his ZR, but we didn't prepare that, did we?
No,
Um, I
I didn't really. Well, I was kind of well. The one of the reasons why I didn't is because of the potential ambiguity about the exact degree of his ascendant, and so knowing that he was like the record is like 3 p.m. I just it could potentially change a few of the options around, and so I just didn't want to put that time investment in really figuring that out,
okay.
given
All right.
given scope of my other duties right now. But uh what I was going to say though was um what was I gonna say? Oh, I thought it's interesting that this show is happening while we're getting Pluto entering into Aquarius, because technically he's another. While we may not be sure about the exact degree, we do know that Aquarius is the rising sign of Truman Capote at the very least. So I thought it was interesting that he's getting this like renewed attention through this show feud, as Pluto is now in his first house posthumously.
Right.
And even right now, I think Venus and Mars, have been in this sort of degree range of his ascendant, of where it may potentially be, as these episodes have been coming out each week. So it's just wild seeing how even posthumously the charts seem to still kind of work.
Yeah, indeed. I just ran his ZR now, and without getting into the weeds, I think you could make a case that he was maybe born even a half hour before he was born. So he would still be Aquarius rising. He would still have spirit in Capricorn, but he would have fortune in Aquarius rather than Pisces. And it does make the zodiacal releasing makes a lot more sense with that. So yeah, that's something we could have explored, and maybe maybe we should have,
uh,
but anyway,
yeah.
it's quite a stretch. I mean, I hear you. That's the reason not to have done it is we would have had to rectify his chart like at least a half hour earlier from what it otherwise is.
Right, right. So I just didn't want to. With given those uncertainties, I think that's why I decided, like, okay, I'll just focus on, understanding a bit more about his life and
Okay,
his
yeah.
transits and stuff. What would you be? Pardon me. What would you have to say about the Venus Mars opposition? Like when he turned 32.
Oh yeah, yeah.
What was that story?
32, I don't really know. He's not at a high point in his career, and I don't know what's going on with his love life. I think when I did look at Venus Mars.
So wait a sec. He would only be 40. It would only been 1946, right?
No, it would have been
I'm
1956.
I'm such an idiot. Yes, there's an extra 10 there, isn't it?
Yeah.
50, okay, 56. So that would have been would that have been when Breakfast at Tiffany's?
No, that's published later than that. Yeah, it's hard to put your finger on. I did look into that. I will say, like, he did his first book, Other Rooms, Other Voices, or Other Voices, Other Rooms. It's Other Voices, Other Rooms, was published during a Venus Mars opposition. Here, why don't I want to?
Oh, okay, yeah, that's.
And it was also here. I'll show you here. Right. So Truman and Other Voices, Other Rooms. Published in January of 1948, and Venus was at 1 degree Pisces opposite, Mars retrograde in Virgo. The last Mars retrograde in Virgo before 1965. But it's also a Jupiter return. You can see he's 23. So he's in a 12th house perfection year, like he would be when he would eventually die. And yeah, there we are. Saturn on his Neptune Venus stuff here, and Saturn's the Lord of the year in a Capricorn perfection year.
That's also notable that he would have had the eclipses occur in his 10th house in that year.
Yeah.
Given that this is like his breakthrough novel, and it occurs to me that when he published Breakfast at Tiffany's, that would have also been during a Mars retrograde and coming up to a Venus Mars opposition. Looks like he published Breakfast at Tiffany's on October 28th, 1958.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that is Mars retrograde.
And
there we are. Yeah, the sun and Neptune on his moon. That's quite the day. Look at that.
Yeah, that's not too bad. And then let's see. Yeah, that's pretty good. I think there was one other Venus Mars opposition I thought I found. I can't quite remember.
Well, Lee Radziwill had one. So Lee Radziwill had a natal Venus Mars opposition, not unlike the one that happened when he published Other Voices, Other Rooms. You can see there she has Venus at 0 Pisces opposite Mars retrograde in Virgo.
Oh, in fact, why don't we check out the publication of In Cold Blood itself?
Oh yeah,
we never actually looked at that. This is like his biggest work.
Yep.
There we are. So is that January 17th, 1966?
It is.
So look at that Mars return. Oh,
Yeah.
and Venus retrograde right around that
Yeah.
same degree range of
Mhm.
where the ascendant might be. Also of interest is we can see that the nodes were just about to enter into Scorpio. So
Yeah.
it may have been possible again that either a solar eclipse might have already happened in Scorpio, or that it was maybe a lunar eclipse would have happened within 4 months or so of
I
this
can
date. But
I can check that here. Yeah, it would have had to been a few months before. Okay.
But yeah, so this is interesting as well, because I think there was another solar eclipse that would have happened in Scorpio in 1975 when his whole life kind of began to fall apart alongside the Uranus conjoining to his Saturn. So we have like eclipses occurring around his 10th house and his midheaven degree, you know, when he has his breakthrough novel, his
Right.
magnum opus, and also his
Right.
decline because of that November 1975 chapter that was published.
Right. So this is, yeah, you can see this is the South Node in 1948. This is the South Node in 1966. And then the 1975 one is there. Right. And there's the
So yeah, those eclipses.
yeah,
You know,
good eye. Good eye. Yeah.
even outside of perfections, I think, you know, those eclipse cycles tend to be very very important.
Yeah, the houses they touch on really bring up the subjects
Yeah,
in
the
question.
thing that's going
Yeah.
on. And you know, in general, I just think, you know, could there have been a more perfect title for someone who was born with Mars in Aquarius or Saturn Scorpio in the 10th for their magnum opus than such
In
a
cold
dramatic
blood.
in cold blood, you know,
Yeah.
Saturn in Scorpio. That is a real that's an image, you know.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that's kind of that's about as much as I can really say about
Yep.
Truman
Yeah.
Capote's chart, you know, from a place of relative ignorance.
No, well done. Well done.
You know, I know a little bit about him, but you know, I haven't read as many biographies as you. I just, you know, I kind of did my sort of skimming, I guess you could
Yeah.
say, through some of the
Yeah.
biographies and
Well, I'm surprised. I'm surprised.
following
Like
the astrological story.
I have a pretty good file on him, but for, you know, why did I not have the chart for the publication of Breakfast at Tiffany's? That's, you know, unforgivable.
No.
But it's yeah. It's an interesting life to cover, all these different, you know, personalities who came in and out of Truman's life. You know, everyone from Andy Warhol to Mick Jagger. I mean, yeah, all kinds of people. Henry Fonda, you name it. Jennifer Jones. He knew a lot of people, and he sure got around. I bet you he was loads of fun. Although I would never want him to write about my life.
Well, I was gonna say, I don't think he's necessarily someone you want to hang out with, because he'd be super fun, but he's gonna write about you, and it's not gonna be flattering. One other thing I just want to note about that cold blood publication date, and I don't know how we didn't notice this. Look where Uranus and Pluto
Are on his Mercury. Yeah, yeah. So yeah.
I didn't even realize it till like just now. I'm like, okay. Well,
yeah,
then.
and he's just invented a literary genre.
There we go. Yeah,
that'll go on to sell thousands of titles, hundreds of thousands of titles, probably.
I hope everyone has enjoyed this stream. You know, you can catch up with the show Feud that's currently airing on FX. We swear we haven't been paid by the studio to cover them.
If only.
Yeah, that'd be super cool. But no, that
yeah, the Feud show is really good. The movies are worth watching. There's another documentary I saw, Truman and Tennessee Williams, a sort of joint PBS documentary on the two of them that was also very interesting. Tennessee Williams would be someone I wouldn't mind covering at some point. Now there's someone whose work I've read. Unlike Truman.
He wrote a Streetcar Named Desire.
He wrote a lot of plays. He wrote a lot.
Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. And,
Yeah. The
gosh.
Glass Menagerie,
Yeah.
which I read when I was a kid.
I read some of these in school. Yeah. So he's still being read,
Yeah, exactly. Tennessee Williams is really vital. I mean, yeah, probably a more important writer than Truman, I'd say. Just not the same kind of personality.
Oh, it's not writing, it's typing.
No, he wouldn't have said that about Tennessee. I think there was quite the friendship between the two of them.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, fantastic. This has been a lot of fun. What are we doing next week again? Oh, we're doing the Oscars, aren't we?
Yeah, so next week will be the night of the Oscars. Now, while we'd love to do a live watch of the Oscars with you, we're not technologically set up to do that, nor are we particularly inclined. So,
but we do have some interesting astrology relating to the Oscars. So you don't need to be some movie nut. You don't need to be some, it's like, I mean, you didn't need to care about Truman Capote really in order to enjoy today's episode. We're just doing astrology, and you might find the subject interesting or you might not, but no matter what, we're getting into some interesting astrology. And with that said, there's plenty with regard to the Oscars to talk about.
Yeah. So we're talking to astrological stories of the Oscars, basically will be what we're talking about next week. And
I will be talking to you from a different continent. Tonight I am flying to South Africa, where I will be for the next few months. And kiss this blue room goodbye, folks. I'll be broadcasting from my Cape Town office as of next week. So as soon as we're done here, I'm going to start packing.
Oh, wow. All right. So I don't know what that means for our second Saturday.
I'll be here for that.
You'll be here for that. Okay.
Yeah,
so
I'm flying tonight. I'll be
okay. So if you if you want to join us in supporting us on Patreon, you can find us at the Astrology Livestream on Patreon. And if you do that, you can join in our private streams, which happen on Saturday evenings, on every second Saturday. And if you join us at the highest tier, then you can even join our watch parties, where you get to vote on a movie and watch the movie with us over live chat, and then meet up afterwards to discuss the astrology of the movie. And we do that on the fourth Saturday of each month during the evening. So, please subscribe, like, share, etc. And if you're so inclined, or if you don't want to do all those things and you just want to chip in and help us, put out these episodes, we'll gladly accept whatever you would like to support us with. So that's the plug. And I think this is where you ask who I am, like you don't know.
Yeah, who are you, Watson?
Why are you here? I mean, you've been great. You've been a good contributor. But
in my best, my baffled Tucker Carlson face. Who are you?
Yeah. Oh my gosh! Remember his bow tie phase,
Mr. Putin? Why did you invade Ukraine?
Oh my God! All right. I'm Patrick Watson. I'm an astrologer, and you can find all my information about me and my services and my work at my website, patrickwatsonAstrology.com. And you can also find me on most social media sites at pwatsonastro. How about you, Nick? Who are you?
I am a Leo. My name is Nick Dagan Best. You can find me at nickdaganbestastrologer.com. I'm also available for all your astrology needs and services. And thank you, Patrick. Thank you. Thank you for spending these 2 hours with me talking about Truman Capote. Thank you as always. This is the reason I do this, is I get to talk to you every week. and life is infinitely better when I get to do that. So thank you for
Thanks.
being there. Thank you for
Well,
being there.
as always, yeah, it's a pleasure.
All
I
right.
just
And
oh,
yeah.
sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
Um, yeah, no, go ahead. You wanted to answer this
Oh,
question about
it was
twins?
so Kate asks, I'm pretty sure, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're a parent of twins. At least that's why I started following your work, Patrick. I hope that's not the only reason.
Because
But
you're
no,
not the parent of twins.
no, I don't. Yeah, I'm not a parent of twins. I am a parent of 3 children. But they're not twins.
I
Um,
am a stepdad to twins. They're not my progeny, but I've been helping raise them since they were 13, and they're now 21 years old and in university. So yeah, I am a step parent to twins. And
well, I am a step parent to one of my children. But yeah, the other 2 are my progeny. So I've sat in the 5th house, so that's
oh
kind of
yeah,
part of um my destiny is to
you can say that again there, Captain Fertile. Um,
yeah.
all right.
Yeah.
Anyway, even though Patrick is not the parent of twins, he's eminently worth following, and his work is worth following. So, all right, cool. All right, folks. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Let's all go out there and read In Cold Blood and enjoy the finest American literature has to offer. And yeah, we'll see you next week for our Oscars episode. And yes, if you're a patron, I look forward to seeing you Saturday night for our get together. All right, Patrick, have yourself a terrific week. Thank you, everyone. And bye for now.
Bye.